examining immigration to the early Americas, it is important to underscore the motives and underlying reasons the immigrants might have for this ambitious venture. While at different times, many of the reasons for immigration remain constant among people from different parts of the world, the earliest example of immigration to the Americas can be found when in 1492 a group of Spaniards embarked on a government-sponsored trip to this new land. Spanish men came to the Americas mainly to expand their empire and to gain wealth, and by the 17th century there was approximately 225,000 people of Spanish descent living in the Americas. Similarly, in 1534, French soldiers and missionaries sailed to the Americas on a government-sponsored trip. The French aimed to bolster their economic status through the fur trade and also hoped to convert others to their religion, and by the late 18th century there was upward of 15,000 people of French descent living in the Americas. Lastly, in 1607, British immigrants came to America mainly to escape religious turmoil and escape poverty through opportunities such as indentured servitude, and by the end of the 17th century there was upward of 200,000 people of British descent living in the Americas. In the case of Europeans, many migrated seeking better economic opportunities, did not have money to pay the voyage fees in order to cross the sea sailing to the Americas. As a result, they had to work as indentured servants to gain freedom, along with some land from the master they worked for, and be able to gain their free lives. The decision to migrate was usually proposed by the head of the family when faced with harsh economic or social pressures, and could take years to accomplish, sometimes forcing families to stop along the way for 1 or more years before arriving at the destination. Families traveled by steamboat, canal boat, riverboat, or the wagon ride. The federal government aimed to improve transportation with a national road from Baltimore to Mississippi that allowed immigrants to avoid some of the rough roads and dense forests along the way. Families from a higher social class had no need to migrate, but were sometimes enticed by a search for adventure. On the other hand, very poor families were many times not able to afford such an expensive trip. Most of the migrating population was made up of experienced farmers or young sons of farmers. These families who chose to embark on such journeys were usually motivated by the promising economic improvement from the abundance of land, exploration of nature, and received letters from friends and relatives who had previously migrated, and to escape urbanization and industrialization, who many believed to be corrupting people and the proper way of raising their children. Early immigrants also saw this as a way of investment by purchasing cheap land that they could later sell to other immigrants at a higher price. The idea of manifest destiny presented by John O'Sullivan in 1845 on the Democratic Review editorial added to the rapid migration by convincing society that it was destined by God that the United States would expand across the North American continent to spread democracy and capitalism. With the continental expansion coming again, it meant that more Native American land would be occupied and annexed. The U.S. federal government sought to expand more by taking treaties and purchases with the Native Americans. The national policy was to help civilize, which meant that there would be no more wars or conflicts. The process also allowed the government to take more land from natives and give it to white people. This part of Manifest Destiny became known as the Indian Removal. In today's society, migration to the United States continues to influence our politics, culture, and social structure through movements like the Development Relief and Education for Alien Minors Act, passed on December 8, 2010. Immigrants can pursue higher education with financial help that would otherwise not be available to them. Most of these young individuals have lived most of their life in the United States, and many only speak English, along with their families who came to this country in search for a brighter future and consider themselves Americans, even though they lack legal status. Thanks to President Barack Obama on January 15, 2012, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was passed, granting a temporary 2-year legal status, along with a 2-year working permit for qualifying dreamers. There are currently about 800,000 DACA recipients in the United States today. This means more working hands in the country, increasing our labor force. Unfortunately, some people like President Trump are against these individuals and other immigrants as well, claiming to target immigrants who he believes to be rapists, criminals, and drug dealers. The Trump administration has gone as far as detaining immigrant minors in detention centers and deporting their parents, leaving the children in metal cages with bags of chips and water bottles for meals. In some cases, older children about 16 years old are the ones taking care of the younger toddlers, changing their diapers, because immigration officials pay little to no attention to them. This past June 2018, there were about 100 shelters in 17 states, having more than 11,000 children detained. President Trump's attempt to deport bad hombres is separating immigrant families and making society think that behaviors like child abuse are an appropriate way of handling immigration policies. One of the pivotal talking points in our modern immigration discourse is the subject of our southern border. More specifically, should we build a wall at our southern border? The idea of a border wall is a complex situation, mainly because a wall of that size and scope is very costly. A really effective border wall would be way too expensive. A more cost-efficient one, however, would soon become easier to circumvent, thus rendering the whole project a waste of time and money. The U.S. had a pretty varied past when it comes to immigration, however it is quite different from the situation we have today. The U.S. has a history of welcoming immigrants and then cutting it off entirely. After the gold rush, the Chinese Exclusion Act made it nearly impossible for Asian people to enter the country. A little later, they also banned immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe with the Immigration Act of 1924. During the Great Depression, immigration to the U.S. slowed dramatically, with the U.S. also becoming very closed off, even sending Jewish people escaping persecution back to Europe. The U.S. has also ethnically cleansed about 400,000 Mexican migrants and Mexican Americans. In recent times, illegal immigration from Mexico is on the rise. The reasons are varied. Some are seeking asylum, but most are economic migrants. And since most of these workers are low skilled, there are none or not many green cards, visas, or other legal methods of immigration available to them.